¿Qué tanto has vivido en este lugar? ¿Por cuántos años?
Yo me mudé en el 2018. Son como 6 años, más o menos,
¿De dónde vienes?
de México.
Antes de llegar a este país, ¿qué fue su perspectiva de llegando a la ciudad de Nueva York? Y si te imaginas vivir en un basement.
No, no me imaginé vivir en un basement. Yo me imaginaba vivir en otro lugar como no sé, un departamento mejor.
My name is Luis Surreal. I am a student at Hunter College, majoring in film. My parents come from Ecuador. They moved here around the 90s, and we've been living here ever since. I lived in a basement my whole life. That's kind of all I've known. So I didn't have much of an idea of what a proper house could be. It wasn't until some point in middle school, I was visiting a friend's house, and that felt like a proper, house. Where I lived was like a typical house building that was kind of layered in 3 rooms, or rather 3 floors, and I just saw myself living in the bottom floor, never really thought much of it as a basement. Then went to my friend's house, and then his house was like the whole entire house was kind of like his, or rather his parents, but of course he's living there. And that just felt big to me. I was like, oh wow, I didn't think we could have had this kind of housing around here.
Personally, I don't really mind where I live, right? As long as we have a roof under our heads, I'll be fine. Obviously, it was very, very, very tough to find a place, because we only had like a limited amount of days to find a place. But luckily, my mom's, which is now the owner of this house, she contacted us, and she said that, I rented this house and the basement is available. And since we had no other choice, we've been looking for an apartment, a house, whatever, we decided to take it. When we got here, I felt amazing, because the other house that we used to live in, it kind of had like a bad memories. So a fresh start was probably amazing for me and for my family, of course.
I remember we would have birthdays at my house for me and my sister's birthday party, and there was always limitations of what we could do, who we could invite. There was always like I wish I could do this, I wish I could have these people over, but just the space itself would not really be a proper place to have that environment. As well, just like telling my friends about where I live.
When I was in high school, I'm not gonna deny I was embarrassed of telling my friends that I was living in a basement, because normally they either live in an apartment or in the first floor, second floor. So for me, it was kind of difficult really telling them that I lived in a basement. But obviously I slowly started to accept it, and if they tell me, I was like, I live in a basement, it's kind of comfy, I get to be with my family very close instead of living in a big house where there's a lot of rooms and us being separate. Obviously it comes with a bit of disadvantages, because sometimes everyone's want their own privacy, but for me, I like spending time with my family.
Aquí yo creo que estamos bien porque cada detallito que se llega a dañar, la dueña enseguida lo arregla. O sea, no tenemos ningún problema con eso. Ella sí cumple como si viviéramos en el primero o en el segundo. O sea, para ella, para todos es igual. O sea, se daña algo, ella enseguida lo arregla.
Our landlord, I guess kind of like divided the house by threes. There was the main center floor, the floor above, and the basement, which the basement's where we lived, and then the middle floor is where our landlord lived. Yeah, they felt like family. If we head outside, if like I was going to school or something, and I would see them, I would always just happily greet them, tell them hi. We would hang out with them sometimes in the summer, where my parents, and they were gonna pay rent. They've throughout the entire time we've lived there, paid in cash, because cash goes under the radar. And it's much more low-key. It wasn't until 2014-ish when we had legal documentations, and at some point afterwards, not quite sure how long afterwards, but at some point afterwards, my parents wanted to pay in check, and our landlord would just like refuse to take check. At some point after then, that like our landlord was kind of treating us much more like strangers. Our landlords would take their dogs for a walk. Normally what they would do is take their exit, or rather they would exit through their door, the one that's on their level, the one that's on their floor, and they would just take their dogs for a walk. We wouldn't even notice. But then what they ended up doing was hella early in the morning, like some point at 5 o'clock in the morning, they would instead take their dogs and exit through our floor and just loudly like slam the door. Who were once family, now treating us like strangers, now treating us like occupants of their house rather than people who are welcomed into their household. So they kind of view us, it kind of show like they're viewing us more as just another way of income for them, I guess.
I really think everybody who is a renter in New York City, if they haven't had a problem in their apartment yet, will at one point in time. It's just part of the way that we operate housing as a country. We have people who own these units, and they don't own them to make them livable for people. They own them to make a profit. And so when you have somebody who owns a building in order to make a profit, and somebody else who lives in that building in order to live their life, these two very different priorities often result in people having like subpar living conditions. My name is Jeremiah Zufo. I'm the Hotline Volunteer Coordinator for Met Council on Housing's Hotline. So in New York City, the big thing that would make a basement legal or illegal is its safety. The apartment has to have a proper means of egress. People have to be able to get out of the apartment in case of a fire. A lot of the times in these basement apartments, they don't have that proper means of egress. Every time you hear about bad flooding that happens in New York City, you'll also hear about people who died in basement apartments.
Water pressure from Hurricane Ida is too much to bear.
The water was rising inside the apartment of Emilio Flores. There were tears of tragedy in Jamaica, Queens.
3 more bodies discovered in Flushing, Queens.
Flores, who was a double amputee, was floated to safety.
13 people were killed after being trapped inside basement apartments.
Her 43-year-old Famati Ramskreet and her 22-year-old son Krisha died.
Found dead, flooded basement apartments. They were unable to escape. Housing experts say up to 300,000 illegal basement dwellings.
In the summer, things get, the heat intensifies, the room gets stuffier, you don't feel like you're in a proper, safe place. You feel like you're kind of suffocating in some way. And then, in moments of heavy rain, we live in a basement, so there's access to like the downpour of the rain just comes in, floods the house, so anytime there was rain, it was always a moment of worry. It was like, all right, is the rain gonna be heavy? How far is the rain gonna reach this time? So we're constantly on our toes, constantly on our feet. Rain would fall, the floors would flood, the carpet absorbed the water, and it would just kind of stay there because, that's the kind of material carpet is. We eventually changed the tile, but we still had carpet for such a long time. So it could be due to the rain and due to the lack of proper ventilation that kind of grew the mold on the walls. Due to my health conditions, and I guess the living conditions didn't really make it any better as well. And I compare it to where I live now. We have access to windows, we have access to air. Most of my health conditions have greatly improved since then.
During the summertime, it is a struggle because, as you can see, there's barely any windows. So, in my room, there's only a window, but it's always getting blocked, so I barely have any fresh air. So during the summer, we either have the air conditioner on, or we love to like open the door to get fresh air. When it rains, there were some issues in the basement. That's why the wall is kind of repaired, because in the bottom, there was water starting to come out. And so it was a very struggle because, we have things here and it could get damaged, but luckily the landlord was able to fix it and it hasn't been a problem ever since.
Al mudarse aquí, uno necesita que firma ahora sí un lease para vivir aquí o cómo es la cosa de viviendo en un basement.
No, a nosotros no nos dan lease.
Since we didn't have a lease, we just instead go for having written, signed confirmation that we live with under our landlord's property.
There's 3 things that will make somebody a tenant in New York City. Do you have a lease? Once you have a lease that's signed by you and a landlord, that's a contract. It's an agreement, and so now you're a tenant because you have this contract that makes you a tenant. Another thing is if you pay money for rent. So if you hand somebody money in exchange for a place to live, that makes you a tenant. And then the third thing is if you've stayed somewhere for 30 days or more. Once you've been living somewhere for at least 30 days, that makes you a tenant. It doesn't matter how you become a tenant. Once you're a tenant, you have tenants' rights. A lot of the people who live in basement apartments will be people who are low income, people who are immigrants, or people who are minorities. And it's because these basement apartments are often affordable places that might be the only accessible place for them to live. When we legalize these apartments, when we do the work that has to be done to them, the physical work on the apartment and then the paperwork to make it legal, these apartments can now maybe be rented for a lot more money. But we want to make sure that they stay affordable for the people that are living in them. So a consequence for legalizing these basement apartments could be pricing out the people who already live there. And so we need to make sure that if these basement apartments are legalized, there's protections in place for the tenants who already live in them to be able to keep doing that and keep their home.
Si tienes planes en el futuro de quedarse aquí o te gustaría un día salir y mudarse a otro lugar.
De hecho, sí, yo estoy planeando tal vez vivir por 2 años más tal vez aquí, pero después mudarme.
¿Qué es lo que está caucionando para que no se mude ahorita?
Primera por la escuela de la niña pequeña, que no quiero moverla hasta que se gradúe del 5º, y entonces ese es el motivo del por qué.
As a 20-year-old, I feel like finding a basement should be a great start, because it's a very little space, and if you're planning on living on your own, then it's a really good thing, You shouldn't feel embarrassed for living in a very small space because, obviously the most important thing is having a roof under your head, having a place to stay, to sleep, to feel comfortable, to feel safe.
I guess in general, that's what my parents envisioned too, just a place for them to be safe, for us to be safe, for any future generations to be safe. That's pretty much what they're after. I guess that's what I'm after too, just a place to call home, a place to have that own safety for yourself. That's kind of what I envision. Most of the people, they don't live in a basement because they want to. It's kind of their only option. But I kind of never envisioned myself having anything better. So I would kind of advise people that, I would say to people that they do deserve better, that they can achieve better as well. That's loud.